Even in its unpredictability, the ocean had a pattern. It was something he could trust. Until it wasn't. Something moved beneath the boat, fast. His breath caught in his throat. His grip tightened on the oars. Another splash, closer this time. He froze, every muscle locking into place. His mind scrambled to make sense of what he was hearing, but his body didn't wait. He was already on high alert. Then, a shadow. Long, dark, shifting just beneath the surface. His pulse hammered throughout his body. Shark. Or something like it. His body tensed. Fight or flight. The instinct screamed through him before he had time to think. If he fought, what? Strike it? Scare it off? Could he? If he ran, how? The boat wasn't built for speed, and the thing was already too close. He clenched his fists, his breath coming too fast, too shallow. His heart slammed against his ribs like it was trying to escape before the rest of him could. And then, it hit the boat. Sudden, violent, unavoidable. The boat lurched hard to the side. He was in the water. Cold, deep, and something brushed against his leg. His hands shot out, fingers clawing against the slick wooden edge of his boat. Don't sink, don't sink, don't sink, his mind screamed at him, his breath coming in frantic gasps. The boat rocked above him, just within reach, but his arms felt slow, weak. Something was down here with him. He kicked hard, eyes darting wildly in the water. His muscles burned, but panic kept him flailing. Move, fight, or die. His hands finally found the edge of the boat. He gripped it with everything he had. The wood dug into his palms as he hauled himself up, gasping, chest slamming against the deck. He rolled onto his back, coughing up seawater, hands shaking. But there was no time to recover. His body was still in survival mode. Without thinking, he lunged for an oar. His grip was tight, too tight, knuckles white. He raised the oar over his head, ready to strike, breath uneven, heart still hammering, eyes scanning the water for whatever had attacked him. Then it surfaced. A huge eye blinked up at him, as if it hadn't even noticed the chaos it had caused. Not a shark, not a kraken, or some other horrific creature from the deep. It was a whale. Massive, slow-moving, its dark eye watching the traveler as if curious. His fingers twitched around the oar, his body still waiting for a fight. But there was no fight, no threat. Only his own fear, still catching up to reality. His chest ached as he exhaled, finally realizing he'd been holding his breath. His arms, still locked in defense and held above his head, felt ridiculous now. Slowly, he lowered the oar. It took another long moment before he let it go completely. Rolling onto his side, soaked and exhausted, he looked down at the water, where the massive creature was already fading into the depths. He let out a breathless laugh, half relief, half disbelief. The threat had never been real, but in those few seconds, it had felt more real than anything. He shook his head, trying to relax the tension in his body. His heartbeat still slowing, his hands still tingling from the rush. The lesson settled into him like the waves beneath his boat. Gentle now, rhythmic, predictable again. Sometimes fear comes first, before logic, before reason, before truth. Sometimes the body doesn't wait for the mind to catch up. He sat back, rolling his shoulders, feeling the last bits of tension drain from his muscles. The horizon stretched ahead, open and waiting. It was time to keep going. This is So What, Who Cares? With Lora McCarville and me, Jeff Kolaski. Join us as we explore practical insights for an impractical mind. So sometimes when stress hits us, our bodies react before our minds even have a chance to think, right?
Yep.
To reason. Maybe we get angry or defensive and ready to fight. Mm-hmm. Or maybe we have that urge to escape, to move, to get away. These are natural responses, so we've learned.
Yes.
They are wired into us for our survival.
Yes.
Right? Because in some life or death situations, these are the appropriate response. But what happens when they show up in our everyday life? To recap, our nervous system reacts to something like an email from our boss as if it's a predator trying to eat us, which it's not. And sometimes a difficult conversation may feel like a battle, right? Last episode, which we know you all listened to, we talked about freeze, fawn, collapse, that sort of thing. Today, so if that's what you want to hear, you're in the wrong episode. But today we're talking about fight or flight.
Yes.
What they feel like, how our culture shapes them, how we can work with these responses instead of being controlled by them. We put fight and flight together in this episode, instead of putting them in two separate episodes. Lora, you did that on purpose.
I did.
Why?
We're speaking about the nervous system not to pathologize or over-identify or use it as the only thing, because we're very complex. So I say that because the whole reason we're talking about it is because I want us to move back into the heart. That's our, get back into the heart. That's our thing. So, but if we're looking at survival brain, and I go back to the hand model, if at the bottom of my wrist, my thumbs tucked in my fingers, at the bottom of my wrist is that freeze, collapse, fawn. If we move up, we move into fight, flight. And that is that mobility. If we think of the nervous system like the gas pedal and the brake, this is the gas pedal. Again, that's not actually how the nervous system works. Yeah. But what we're talking about is the heart rate goes up, the mouth goes dry, digestion stops, or we completely empty out. Like we have bodily responses. Sure. And fight and flight have a similar bodily response, but it's not the same.
But one is toward and another is away, correct?
Both are away from the predator, but they're engaging differently. It's to get away. It's not to, so fawn is more of that thing where you're in connection to appease and make the predator do the thing or the threat to go away. If we just let's go to fight. If we're in the wild and mama zebra has a baby zebra, and a hyena comes around and starts messing with the baby zebra, the brain sends the neurochemicals to the jaw to get strong, and you'll see the mama zebra bite at the hyena. Now, that's not to be in connection with. It's to get away from or to make that thing go away, right?
Okay. So now, physically, I might be moving toward, but the reason is to be away from.
Yeah, to survive, to get away from. Now, and the hyena goes away.
Right.
Right? So in that way, that fight thing happens. Now, how does that look in us when we go into fight? Body tenses, our fists tense, our teeth, our jaw clenches. Maybe we start grinding our teeth at night. But it is this, and it's a lockdown. Let's go, right?
Yeah. Felt sense Somatics. What is this? What does that mean in this context?
Yeah. So when we're talking about nervous system, we can move into the left brain and say, okay, these are the things of it. But what is the felt sense means what is my interoception? What is my neuroception? What is happening inside that I'm sensing? What is my felt sense? And it can be even outside. Now, sometimes we lose our felt sense, like we can't actually. And I worked with this kiddo for a couple of years, and there was no, like, I can feel my hand, right? Took her 2 years to be like, oh, I have a feeling and I have an emotion. So we can shut down. So if someone's like, I don't have a felt sense, that's okay. So it's the sense of like, oh, this is hard, or my stomach is churning, or I feel warmth. It's our perception of the body. Somatics is the soma, the body, and it's used free willy-nilly. Somatic experiencing comes from Peter Levine, but somatics in general is used really loosely.
Okay.
What it is a way to understand the nervous system in general, in the way of how does my body experience these things.
Things that
and,
happen.
And maybe not just nervous system, also joy or all the other stuff that happens to us too.
When we're talking about, let's just say fight first.
Okay.
What does that feel like, look like in the body, and how does that connect to what you were talking about with felt sense and all of that?
Yeah. So if we have a tendency to move towards fight, or we work easily with accessing anger, and we flip our lid, or we move outside our window of capacity and we lose a sense of self, often there's some things that start to happen inside us, like I'm feeling hot. Also, you could be feeling, I don't feel my feet. Everything's rising. I'm clenching my teeth. This felt sense before we flip our lid, right? So when it's the nervous system and we don't have control over it, meaning it happens like this, and the response is, boom, I throw a fist, right? That's very different than, oh, it's coming. It's coming. I can feel it coming. So the felt sense can really cue us into like how we're navigating states, how long we stay in. So if we think of like duration, time, and intensity, that really plays into it being maybe becoming part of our personality. I'm just an angry guy, you know. Or, so that felt sense is one way we can start to work with ourselves.
Because you're recognizing this response coming?
Yeah, right. Now, when it's an automatic response, that's very different. But when it's thoughts, making emotions, feelings, sensations, if we're perseverating on something, very different. If we're lost in the storytelling.
So we're kind of talking about two things here then. One being whatever it may be. I just noticed that my baby is being attacked by a hyena.
Yes.
Versus I smell a hyena. Maybe something is, I haven't seen it yet. The things are starting to make whatever it is in my instinct or in my environment that's making me feel like there may be a problem coming here.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to feel that come up. Now I have some options on how I'm going to respond and how I'm going to work through this, as opposed to just I'm biting the hyena.
Yeah, or biting the air.
Right. Sure.
Or grinding my teeth, waiting for the threat to come.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why I wanted to bring in the felt sense thing.
Flight. How is the feeling to run away? How does that feel different? Because if I were to, to think about times where I felt like either I did or I felt like I needed to fight, I'm not feeling like I need to run away. I'm feeling like I need to tense up and stand here and fight. Whereas
Flight. Okay, so this is another story, or this is a story that is a great example of flight. I have a younger sister who I love very much. I preference that because of the story.
Okay. Now I'm excited.
So we were walking down the street. I was an adult, so this wasn't when we were little, and she and I were walking down the street, and I perceived a dog. I heard a dog. I thought it was running out of their house and going to attack because of the barking. So perceived threat. I pushed my sister at the dog and took off running.
Yikes.
I know.
Doesn't make one feel very good about oneself.
I'm like the older sister. No, you're right. Afterwards, the dog came to the door, didn't bark, stopped at the door. Sure. There was no threat. My sister was like, what just happened?
What the hell?
And then she says to me, did you throw me at that dog? And I was like, I did.
I'm not laughing at you, but I am laughing at you a little bit.
And I had no choice.
Yeah.
I didn't think here's a strategy. My little sister I love so much.
I need to be brave
I'll throw her at the dog and I'll save myself. No, I just ran. Right. So in that moment, it happened like that. And so that's flight. Now, what happened? Again, the threat was over. It wasn't actually there, but it doesn't matter. My brain perceived it as a threat. I responded. It was over. And now it's something we can joke around. When the mind when we don't get the message that it's over, like that we survived it, we'll either consciously or subconsciously keep the story going. And then we'll find ourselves in physical patterns of holding that nervous system response. And it can be very low level. We could call it anxiety.
Okay.
Or a prolonged fight or flight response.
Okay.
It can be. It's not the only cause of it. But if we're looking at intensity and duration again, if we're looking at like the event didn't end, again, it doesn't mean consciously. Like consciously, I know the event ends, but maybe somewhere in our looping or underneath everything, we're thinking, oh man, I wish I had done it different. Or I can't believe that thing happened. And the mind thinks, because there's only 2 spots the brain has like as timekeepers, we think, okay, not consciously, we go, okay, I got to go back and change the thing. I need to go back. And we don't get the message that we got the job done. So then we get stuck in these nervous system states on a very maybe low level. And with time duration, it can look like anxiety and in both fight flight.
Because our brains are still thinking that threat is there.
I mean, again, this is like a philosophical,
maybe
subconscious story.
Right.
Is that it didn't get the job done. And that is that it survived. You survived. But the brain has to get the message. The mind has to get the message. And I'm using that a little interchangeably here, but that's this lens that we're looking through.
Cultural conditioning, rewards, punishments, things like that. What are some ways our culture like rewards and or punishes?
I mean, my favorite thing that happens in our culture when people have high anxiety, but they're really good at performing their job, is that they get told like, oh, they're such a hard worker. They're such a hard worker. But it's just their anxiety is really drives them to keep going and to be perfect and go and go and go and go. Yeah. We see it a lot in high performance, like kiddos that are super high performance. And then they have these high states of anxiety. And it's like, well, what came first?
Right.
Right. Did this like revving, I like the language of revving, felt sense revving energy. Is that driving this? Right. Then, and because it's both fight and flight, it's a mobility. So it's like, oh wow, they're runners, right? They're super active. They're getting it done. They're top CEOs and they're functioning outside the window of capacity and maybe living with states of anxiety.
Yeah. Chronic states that, are hard to get under control. I would imagine that, a lot of times that fight sort of response to could be admired in like leadership and obviously sales positions, things like that.
And in families.
Yeah.
A lot of families in our culture have a very strong sense of fight, arguing, yelling, punching the walls. I mean, I hear a lot of things it's surprising. I go, oh no, that's not like a normal response of punching the wall.
Right.
Like it's not actually a healthy response.
Right.
Which is interesting. That kind of brings me to this other thing of
Sure.
anger and what we know about anger in the way of fight. There was a time in which we would say, like, give a kid a pillow and have them punch the pillow. Or there's these like places you go to break things, to get your anger out.
Sure.
And what we know now is there's a bit of reward system with anger. So have we talked about this before?
No, I don't think so.
This is what's so cool about science is that what we're learning is constantly changing. So as you and I are talking, like, give it a second and we're gonna be like, oh my gosh.
We'll listen back to this in a year and go,
yeah.
Wow, we were way no.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah,
because
sure.
This is the beauty of evolving in science. And but with anger, it's not actually beneficial to hit the pillow and punch the pillow or to break the things, because our brain releases this yummy stuff that we get a little high on. And then we need a little bit more. And we need a little bit more. And you can see it in the classroom. It's super easy. A kid who pops off a lot with the teacher, afterwards, they're like, yeah. Like that goo hits them, I always say, don't get high on your own supply when I'm teaching, because it is an absolute high on your own supply.
Yeah.
Right? So instead, what we learn how to do is hold anger.
Right.
This is where meditation, when people go like, I'm not good at meditating. When you have your foot on the gas, or you're running from the threat, or you're fighting a threat, it doesn't make a lot of sense to sit down and meditate. It's radically uncomfortable.
So you're suggesting that anger should be held?
I don't mean like bite your tongue. What I mean is anger is an emotion, not an action.
Okay.
And most of us have seen anger as an action.
As an action.
And anger is an emotion. So what we do have to learn how to do is build a higher tolerance to discomfort.
Sure.
Again, Love and Rage is a great book by Lama Rod Owens, where we do need to know how to be in a righteous place with our anger. It's a holy emotion. It points the heart in the right direction. So when it's in right relationship and we're angry, often it's the compass of the heart.
Sure.
When it moves into more of that nervous system response state, when it goes outside of us and it becomes an action that's full of something we regret doing and we lose agency, that's not the same.
Right. There's a lot of cultural, ties that anger equals violence, anger equals
and it has.
Rage.
It has. Yeah.
And because that's the action that feels like it should go along, can we make those not synonymous? Like how can we, what are some ways that we can formulate, like, our anger is an emotion, not an action, but what do we do with that?
So we want to think about if we could look at it through the lens of like right action. So if I'm feeling angry and I can be with that anger and I can metabolize it so that I take right action that's aligned with the self, what's aligned with my community, what's aligned with my values, right? That is action, but it's not anger as action that's harmful, that's full of regret, shame, guilt, that causes harm to others. That's so different. And that's how it's been demonstrated a lot.
Yeah.
And it's even been prompted up as like, okay and important to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nah.
I think even as we speak right now, I'm struggling to think of what action could even possibly help me not be in that angry state or help me to feel better when because if I'm hearing you right, and maybe this isn't the discussion, the right episode for this, but if I'm hearing you right, even if I were to go play my drums for an hour if I'm angry, it's not necessarily a healthy thing to do, because then, I mean, it is. Because
No,
it's
that's
not
a good thing to do.
But-
That's not causing harm.
right. But at the same time, it's still releasing the goo that you said that is.
No, so that is not so that's different.
Okay.
So the goo that comes from popping off, where then when you get like high from, and then you come down and you're like, ooh, I wish I wouldn't have thrown that punch, or and then you're riddled with like guilt or shame, or there's consequences that are really, that's way different. That's a very different neurochemical than when you go and play your drums. That actually is part of that. That's moving. You're playing your drums, you're moving your body and you're metabolizing it. It's a completely different thing.
Okay. So I can definitely see that.
Still play your drums.
Yeah.
So then what happens when we have these states of fight, flight, and it's high, I'm using anger, but there's other emotions that come with it that are more of these like revy feelings. Fear. Yeah. This thing. When we're learning how to be with that, yes, moving and finding a way to sit in a meditation, finding a way to walk and be with it, a way to befriend it, meaning here it is as a visitor, this emotion, right? Here it is coming to visit and it's teaching me something. And I can be tender and sweet with it, not use it, not react with it.
Sure. This has been part 1 of a 2-part episode on our fight or flight nervous system response. Join us next week for episode 2 for the conclusion. We hope to see you then.